But it was community pride and community involvement.
Oh, absolutely.
They were for the deal.
Absolutely.
And then now I realize, I know you had a lot of confidence and still have a lot of confidence, but you would play games and you would score, what, 30 points?
Well, I had about 2 or 3 games where I had 30-point games.
Now, you were 6'2", and in basketball at that point, that was a good-sized man.
Yes, it was.
And then
one side note to that is that some of the schools that we went to and we came on the court, the starting 5, we had 3 boys that were about the same size, over 6 foot, and then we had 2 boys that were about 5'10". And so people would call us draft dodgers. They thought we were too old ought to be in the military rather than in high school.
And so you went through a 16-game schedule, and I believe you tell me that you lost 2 games in that 16-game schedule, and one of them was tell us about that one. The one with the sheriffs.
We played at a place called Hinesville, and the referee was the sheriff and his deputy. And they couldn't referee, and they called fouls on us all night long, and my hands were black and blue from being slapped at when I was trying to shoot. And the final score was they beat us by a couple of points, but it was very low scoring, like about 16-14. And but back then the high school didn't have those big scores, so when I was able to make a 30-point game and we scored 50, 60 points. Why, that was a big score.
So what happened to this school when they came back and played you?
Well, we beat them by 35 points.
So here you are, and they're really excited. The community's excited because you have a really good team and they're winning. And now you're getting ready to go into the state championship.
Right.
State
tournament.
State tournament to determine a state championship. Yeah. And so you go and it's 4 games to be champion?
Yes.
And so you win the first 2.
Right.
And those 2 games were blowouts?
No, they were just good, solid wins. Yeah. I mean, win by 8 or 9 points. Because you're at that point, you're playing the best schools in that division, and so you don't have big runaway ball games.
All right, so now you're into the 3rd game of the state tournament.
Yes.
And this is the quarterfinals of the state. So you're only 2 games away from there being state champion.
Right.
From a team that had no coach. You were the only, to the way I hear it, and from anybody who's ever heard the story tells me, you're the only student coach in the history of high school basketball.
Well, that's what I've found out more or less over the years. When I got off living down in Georgia, here a couple of months ago, I was at a seminar up in Waco, and the football coach was there as an inspirational speaker, Grant Taff, and I talked to him after the game, after the convention, and I told him about my experiences. He said he'd never heard of anything like that. He says, you're undoubtedly the only player coach in high school history in America, as far as he was concerned.
Well, anyway, so you're now down to 2 games in the state tournament, and you're down to the 3rd game, 2 games away from being state champions, and your team's getting on the bus to go to the game.
Right.
And then what happened?
Well, I had not arrived yet, but the principal or the superintendent of the school, he apparently got a little bit crosswise with the idea because he thought they were giving too much attention to the basketball team, and I guess he even probably thought they were giving me too much attention. And so he came on the bus that night and told them that they had to be in class on time the next day, or they would be expelled from school.
And then he left the bus.
Yep.
And
he never went with us to any of the ball games.
Okay. And then you show up on the bus, and did anybody tell you about it?
No, nobody told me about it. And when we got to the game and we got to start playing, I could tell that there was something wrong. And I kept asking them, well, what's the matter? Tell me what's the matter. And nobody would say anything. And so we lost the ball game by a couple of points. And then on the way home, one of the cheerleaders told me what had happened before we left to come to the ball game.
And then so the next day or the day after, you went over and talked to the school board?
Yes, I did.
And you told them what happened?
Right.
And what happened to Principal Green?
He got fired. The next year, they built a gymnasium, and hired a full-time coach, and in the 60 years since then, Richmond Hill High School has won 3 state championships.
And at this point of that team, how many are still alive of the 10 players?
Of 9.
9. But it's a wonderful story that the idea that out of adversity, because I'm sure you were crushed when there was going to be no basketball, and you made a story that's even greater than if you. Oh yes, and the next year your team in Connecticut went how far?
Well, the senior year that I would have had in Connecticut, the basketball team went undefeated during the regular season, and that's the only time in the last 60 years that they have done that. And they went to the state tournament, and they got beat by the very same club, Ellsworth Memorial, and by 2 points for the state championship.
And so Effie says that he thinks he might have been worth 2 points if he had stayed there.
Well, that's what they tell me. They have a class reunion every 5 years, and I've come to most of them.
And that's why you're here now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just got to having the 60th high school reunion for Suffield High School. And they always gripe at me about the fact that if I'd have stayed, and I said, well, I think I could have probably been worth 2 points.
Yeah, well, anyway, the idea of this story and the magic of it is that the love of basketball, the love of competition, and willing to overcome whatever obstacles that are there, and just the idea that you had the leadership capabilities of taking guys and taking them where they never dreamed they could go.
That's very true. When I go to Richmond Hill, we've only had 2 reunions down there because there was just 9 in the senior class, and so what we did to have the 50th reunion, we took the whole decade. And so at the 50th reunion, taking the whole decade, 129 people showed up. That included wives and whatnot. And so 10 years later, we do the 60th. And only 87 showed up for that group. And of that 129 that came to the first, 29 of them had assumed room temperature. So they talked about it at this reunion and said, well, maybe we better not wait 10 more years.
It may not be around.
And so they're going to have one now, start having them every 2 years. And it's been quite an experience to go back to these reunions because, you know, you get to hear what they finally did with their lives. And the fact that so many of us are still alive, they tell me that that's kind of unusual to have that number of people for that long, still so many of them alive.
And on this time, when you went to the last reunion down there, they kind of set aside a little historical presentation of your team.
Yeah, we're now in the museum that they have there now.
And so, how does it make you feel when you go in to see yourself in a museum?
Well, I really didn't give much thought to it, but one of my classmates, I thought, hit it pretty good. Back in World War II, when all the National Guards were called up, they had a home guard, and that was 15, 16, and 17-year-old kids. And they got uniforms and weapons and the whole 9 yards. And so they had a picture of that home guard unit for that little town on the wall of the museum. And Ralph Parker, who I'm talking about, well, he came and he said, you know, he says, you kind of start thinking you must be getting old when you come to a museum and you're hanging on the wall.
And your number was number 11, right?
Number 11, right.
Right, and you have one grandchild who uses that number playing ball?
Yes, my just grandson.
Yeah, and one of my grandchildren is going to use that number playing this year up in Vermont.
Okay.
Right. Well, anyway, I thought it was important that we come and have this little conversation to let people get the flavor of what really happened. And we're all, the story come down from the family all these years about this really interesting event. And to sit down and talk about it and think about it, I think no matter where you are when you see this, you may see it now, or it may be a relative 100 years from now or 200 years now from seeing it. But I think it's nice to see it from the guy who actually did it.